Hello there. Sweden's crime rate is out of control. I wonder why. According to a new report, Sweden now has the highest crime rate in Northern Europe. And that's something that no one would have predicted a decade or so ago. But given their recent demographic changes, many of us saw this coming over the last few years. And at the end of last month, the Swedish government was forced to call the army in to help bolster domestic law enforcement. Something I talked about in a video called Sweden Shock Calls the Army In. And now a report on the Globalized Organised Crime Index website at ocindex.net says that Sweden has a criminality score of 4.7, an increase from 4.56 in 2021, which now puts it at the highest of the 8 Scandinavian and Baltic states. And on top of that, its score for resilience against organised crime is 7.46, which is in 7th place of those 8 countries. Sweden is high on the crime ranking, but low on the resilience ranking. Now, this report says that 83% of the global population now live in countries with high criminality, up from 79% in 2021. And that the global criminality score is 5.03, and the global resilience to organised crime is only 4.81. So even with its scores of 4.7 and 7.46, Sweden is a lot healthier than the global average. And now I'm going to spoil your day. The UK's criminality score has increased from 4.89 in 2021 to now stand at 5.75. That's much higher than Sweden's. And it puts us as the second highest of 11 countries in Western Europe. And our resilience score has fallen from 7.88 to 7.54, just marginally better than Sweden, but in 3rd place amongst the 11 Western European states. Now, the main criminal players in Sweden are, according to the report, most organised crime groups and gangs in Sweden are dominated by non-ethnic Swedes from the Balkans and the Middle East, among others. According to reports, foreign-born individuals and their offspring are significantly overrepresented in crime, while foreign groups not based in Sweden, predominantly from Eastern Europe, enter the country to conduct burglaries and theft. It also says that organised Roma groups are also increasingly prevalent, but also that biker gangs are the most prominent mafia-style groups in the country. Now, Sweden does have a moderate human trafficking market, but the report says that the UK is a major destination for human trafficking victims, mostly from Africa, Asia and Eastern Europe. Exploitation in the form of forced labour and sexual trafficking is common for both domestic and foreign victims. And forced labour in the UK is mostly in agriculture, construction and domestic service. And where irregular migration using rubber boats and the backs of lorries is concerned, the report says, although some limited law enforcement operations have been carried out, the response has not been systematically focused on interdiction and action against the organisers. Seems to sum up the UK government response pretty well, don't you think? Now, what does the report say about the main criminal actors here in the UK? Foreign criminal groups, including Asian, Russian and Balkan organised crime syndicates, continue to operate in the UK. Albanian gangs are believed to be consolidating power in the UK criminal underworld, particularly in the cocaine market. Russian organised crime groups are also increasing their hold and influence in the UK, involved in money laundering, cyber attacks and targeted assassinations. Sounds more like South America than the good old UK, doesn't it? Now, although Sweden has a moderate human trafficking market for things like prostitution, the report says that human smuggling is a prevalent issue in Sweden. Sweden is a popular destination for refugees and asylum seekers due to favourable family reunification policies, support for integration, and a generous welfare state. But it goes on to say that the growth of irregular migration and the failure of integration policies have strained social cohesion and created discontent within immigrant populations, causing rising levels of violence between immigrant and host communities. Too many, too quickly, perhaps? Now, one of the things that caught my eye about the UK was that the UK government has been trying to tackle economic crime and fraud in the private sector, mainly money laundering and tax evasion. But the existence of a large network of enablers who facilitate large-scale money laundering poses a significant reputational risk to the country's integrity. And who exactly are these enablers who dirty their hands with such trade? These enablers include accountants, lawyers, investment managers, notaries, and company formation agents who assist in moving, cleaning, spending, and defending ill-gotten gains within the legitimate economy. In fact, a significant number of all limited liability partnerships ever incorporated in the UK show major red flags for their use in high-end financial crimes. And the report also says that concerns have been raised about corruption in the judicial system and connections between members of the UK establishment and Russian oligarchs. Looks like our own law enforcement, in fact the entire establishment, is in need of a bit of an overhaul of both procedures and personnel, doesn't it? Now, there are, of course, major homegrown crime outfits in both Sweden and the UK, and both are very active. And in the UK, says the report, domestic criminal organisations, including mafia-style groups, have been expanding their influence in certain areas of the UK, especially in London, Liverpool, Birmingham and Glasgow. However, growth of domestic crime groups in the UK does appear to be moderate. Now, we in the UK like to think we live in a modern developed country where crime affects a few people elsewhere. But reading this report throws a light on what governments might not want us to know about, especially that huge money laundering racket that seems to filter through to every level of the UK establishment. Now, as ever, there is a UN convention on all of this. The United Nations Convention Against Transnational Organised Crime, signed in Palermo, Italy in the year 2000. And this was brought about by the need to make sure that when crime crosses borders, so does law enforcement. Well, I'm not sure how well that's going on at the moment, though. Anyway, the then Secretary-General of the UN, Kofi Annan, summed up the problem like this. One of the starkest contrasts in our world today is the gulf that exists between the civil and the uncivil. The civil being the constructive forces of society and the uncivil being the forces of crime. And arrayed against the constructive forces in ever greater numbers and with ever stronger weapons, he said, were terrorists, criminals, drug dealers, traffickers in people, and others who undo the good works of civil society. They take advantage of the open borders, free markets, and technological advances that bring so many benefits to the world's people. They thrive in countries with weak institutions, and they show no scruple about resorting to intimidation or violence. Their ruthlessness is the very antithesis of all we regard as civil. They are powerful, representing entrenched interests and the clout of a global enterprise worth billions of dollars. He could be talking about just about any modern-day corporation, couldn't he? And what he talked about in 2000 is still with us 20-plus years later. So reading through that tract by Kofi Annan and this new organised crime report, you get the distinct feeling that we're still losing the war against organised crime. Probably because we are not being ruthless enough ourselves when dealing with extremely ruthless criminals.